Okay, ladies and gentlemen, part two of Frankfurt School Culture, Industry and New Media Giants, and this shouldn't take a huge amount, as you'll be very pleased to know. So, really, the key things to take into account from Adorno and Horkheim's criticism and Adorno's criticism in general of the culture industry is that all mass culture is mass produced, it is identical. The only differences we see are illusory in those through the processes of standardization and pseudo individualism. And we confuse in this process, in society in general, the difference between use value and exchange value, and therefore we should be skeptical about the value of mass culture in general. And this is very important in terms of thinking about media studies, of course, because it basically draws us to a conclusion that we should really think of all media that we consume kind of as trash. Now, I'm a trash bag and that's okay, you know, and I'm quite comfortable with being trash. But you guys, you've got standards, you know, you're making your way in the world. You don't want to be trash, okay? You don't want to be like me. So, obviously Adorno and Horkheimer's criticism is very, very important. Now, the ideological critique of the Frankfurt School is ideal in discussing the broadcast media area, which we really don't live in anymore. I say that we kind of still live in the broadcast era. Obviously, we still consume cinema, right? We still watch TV, albeit our habits of watching TV have radically changed. But we still consume what we might call television programs, even if it's just, if you're like me, you know, I don't watch TV anymore. The only thing I watch on TV is sort of live sport, and it's just Netflix and Amazon Prime after that. So the veracity and longevity of the theory comes from the possibility of this work being applicable today in the age of digital media. And what I would argue is it is still applicable because we still have industries from the broadcast media era that have adapted to the digital age. You know, we have newspaper industry, we have the music industry. Their business models have radically changed over time and their delivery models have changed, but they still produce, and therefore Adorno and Horkheimer's critique is applicable. But we also have other media industries that we need to consider too. So really, when we're thinking about media today, we need to look at what is the underlying principle of the big media companies today. And by big media companies, I mean what we would usually refer to as the big four: Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple. Digital media companies want to control their audiences just like the media producers of Adorno and Horkheimer's time. Now, mass media producers wanted control over their audience. They wanted them to keep on buying their stuff, right? And in doing that, they were able to parlay sort of dominant ideologies of those times as well. The methods and tools of doing this today are radically different. Rather than churning out ideological texts, these digital media companies exercise control over us. So I think the important thing is to note that the method of establishing control is now much different, and therefore we can still think of the Frankfurt School as useful, but perhaps not as applicable, given that ideological texts are now not the main thing. Indeed, most of the content of digital media is produced by us, but how that digital media structures the way we talk to each other and produce things is in itself ideological. So digital media affords these companies methods of surveillance which can generate new revenues for their users. Really, the business model has changed. Okay, now it's not necessarily the value of ideological text which is important, it's us actually using the technology and the mediums themselves which generates profit, as well as controlling what we see and experience. So controlling the means of production is nothing new, but collecting highly granulated data on the use of platforms is very new, and that's the primary business model. It's still just a business, it still creates false needs, there's still standardization and pseudo-individualization. You know, once you've seen one video on TikTok, you've seen them all. They're all the bloody same anyway. You know, it doesn't stop me from wasting hours and hours a day on TikTok, but it's, you know, there's no real differences, and these companies just want control through leveraging our activity for data. In terms of how this all links together with last week, Adorno and Horkheimer were arguing that the mass media were responsible for the transmission of ideologies of a ruling class. So they're very much aligned to the sort of critique I was talking about in the previous videos. Those in power were able to diffuse their ideologies in order to legitimize them. Remember that key word, legitimize, to the public. Those ideas then become what we call hegemonic. Hegemony is a concept closely associated with Antonio Gramsci, who I've got a photo of there, and how this is done is important. And it is done through what we call discourse. So this is Stuart Hall here, who's an immensely important media theorist. Hall's statement from 1992. When statements about a topic are made within a particular discourse, the discourse makes it possible to construct the topic in a certain way. It also limits the other ways in which the topic can be constructed. Now, what Hall is telling us about the operations of the media is this. The media makes particular statements about particular topics and therefore structures the way we can discuss those things in society. So if the media is owned by particular people who have particular political views, and though that media therefore gives those views across, that dominant ideology across to us, that discourse itself structures how we can talk about things in society. You might want to consider how this works. You might want to consider it in the context of Black Lives Matter, for example, where many supporters of Black Lives Matter have been ostracized from the mainstream media for many, many years, and therefore discussion of Black Lives Matter in the media focuses on the disruption that Black Lives Matter has caused in terms of public protest, or in terms of, people taking the knee at football events. Who cares if people take the knee at football results? I care because I want to support Black Lives Matter, but who cares in the media about it? It doesn't delay the match. It's like 10 seconds. What are you talking about right here? It's ridiculous, right? The media is structuring the different ways that people can talk about Black Lives Matter. And when you've got a right-wing media that's saying like the Black Lives Matter movement is radical left and terrorist and so on, as they do in the United States, it then structures the way that people converse about Black Lives Matter in everyday society. And that discourse, therefore, is carrying a power with it. It's legitimizing a particular set of views about Black Lives Matter. Stuart Hall, I think, would have been fascinated by Black Lives Matter. So in this sense, discourse is a group of statements or a way of organizing knowledge and understanding so that certain ideas appear true. And both the Marxist view and Adorno and Horkheimer's view would agree with this, okay? And a discourse constructs a certain set of beliefs that are held in common by a number of people. So I've got a picture here of an anti-war demo, and there's a particular discourse on anti-war. There would be another group in society who would hold a different set of discursive ideas about that. The war is good for whatever reason. So when a discourse reaches a particular point in society, these beliefs are taken for granted as the truth. And that's where Gramsci's concept, Antonio Gramsci's concept of hegemony comes into play. When we have particular ideologies which have been legitimized through discourse to become common sense ideas, they become, as we know, hegemonic. Okay, they become common sense ideas. I'll give you a great example, right? I don't do this very often when I'm making videos, but here I have an e-cigarette, right? Oh, that's some good nicotine. Oh, yeah. So I've given up smoking now about 2 months, a bit more than 2 months, something like that. This is in August, right? So it's a couple of months since I've given up smoking. And smoking's bad, kids. Smoking's bad. Smoking's bad for you. And it's just bad, all right? There's a discourse around smoking which says smoking is bad. Smoking's like one of the worst things you can do. Kills people. It's genuinely lethal. Yeah, that's true. That's correct. But when did it become bad? There's loads of things that kill you out there. Alcohol will kill you. You drink enough alcohol, that'll kill you, by the way. There's lots of stuff out there which is bad for you. Speeding's bad, everyone does it, right? Me. The anti-smoking discourse is hegemonic. It's common sense, okay? Now, it ignores some things about smoking as well. You know, it's not lethal for everyone, obviously, but we consider it to be like an absolute killer. I mean, you know, it is a killer, and you know, I'm really happy I've given up actually, and I'm going to try and stick to it this time. I've been like the master of giving up in the past. I've given up so many times, you know, I'm just awesome at it. But this time I'm sticking to it. This is a legitimized idea in our society, though, and the reason why I raise it is because that discourse on smoking wasn't always true. Well, I guess smoking was always lethal for you, but discourses in society until the 1960s did not consider smoking to be a bad thing. It is something which has grown. You know, it's something that's been legitimized as an idea to become hegemonic through discourses in society. You've had to have social change in order for that idea to take place. You've had to have the media on board. You've had to have the media stopping advertising cigarettes, and you've had to have the media, you know, publicizing voices which tell us that smoking is really bad for you. And when that change happens, then that idea of smoking becoming really, really bad, which really takes hold probably in the 80s and 90s in the UK, you know, that's when you started to see lots of people giving up finally. This thing is common sense at that point. Everything operates through discourse, and the media provide us with most of our popular discourses in society. So therefore, power is expressed in ideologies, and ideologies are legitimized through discourse. Our words have power, our utterances have power, and how we construct media texts have power, because all of these things are constructing through a media discourse a particular ideology which is being transmitted to an audience. These ideas largely come through the work of the French polymath and sociologist Michel Foucault. Discourse and ideology are related but also distinct to them. Ideology often linked to a specific set of power relations in capitalism. Discourse is more diffuse than that, though, and there can be lots of discourses. There can be sort of anti-capitalist discourses, which I'm sure you're familiar with as well. So the relationship between discourse and ideology is complex, and it's a set of ideas that comes from Michel Foucault. Power and knowledge are very much intimately linked, and both are used in societal control by institutions, of which media institutions would be very important. Power always controls and defines knowledge. So this is, if you like, Foucault's contribution to how we understand how discourse and ideology and power work. Power is always intimately linked to knowledge. Who knows what, and what do people want you to know? And it's the deployment of power and knowledge through discourse which enables social control. You might want to think, okay, well, give me an example, Leighton. You know, you're talking about these things, and yeah, I'm nodding along, and you know, so on and so forth. Give me an example. Okay, well, institutions like the state control what we know about the machinations of the state, how the state works. They tell us some things, they don't tell us other things. You know, if you look at the British state during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's pretty easy to say that it's shambolic in the extreme, but they're not going to tell us how shambolic it's been, because they control knowledge about the workings of the state and therefore have power over citizens. So a lot of people still think that the British government has done a good job. Yeah, right. Well, a lot of people still think the earth is flat as well. You know, you shouldn't really go on popular opinion. In terms of what the government lets us know about the workings of government, we see the exercise of power through that control. So knowledge is controlled in particular ways, and that is used to exert power. Power, therefore, also controls and defines knowledge. Who is in power controls what can be known, what can be spoken about in terms of discourses, and therefore what ideologies are transmitted. I've got a little example here for you, okay, in terms of how power constructs discourse and ideology. So, Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005 in New Orleans. And if you want to find out more about Hurricane Katrina, and you've got like 8 hours to spare, I recommend you watch Spike Lee's documentary When the Levees Broke. It's one of the greatest documentaries ever made, and it's fascinating. Now, what we have here is 2 clips. I know Hurricane Katrina was a long time ago now, but I think this is almost a perfect example, so I've kept on using it over the years. These are 2 clips that I picked up from the same news source, Yahoo News, on the same day in 2005. And what we see are 2 very similar things on the left and right. We see a African-American gentleman carrying some stuff in a bag, and we see two white people carrying some stuff and wading through water, and they're both wading through the terrible floodwaters that Hurricane Katrina brought to New Orleans when the levees broke in New Orleans and basically the whole city flooded. Now you might think at this point, okay, these are both on Yahoo News, they're doing the same thing as one another, so how's that going to be reported? Well, we see on the left here, we've got the picture of the two sort of white individuals. Let's have a look at the how that picture is straplined, you know, the headline for the story. Two residents. Focus on that word. Two residents wade through chest-deep water after finding, keep an eye on that word, bread and soda from a local grocery store. So the framing of that image, these people are residents. What does the word resident mean? It has legitimacy. These people are supposed to be in New Orleans. They're supposed to be in that area. They live there. They're property, either owners or dwellers. They have a legitimate reason to be there. And they found bread and soda. They didn't steal it. They found it. Now let's look at the other guy. A young man walks through chest-deep floodwater after looting a grocery store in New Orleans. What? What? That guy's a looter, those guys aren't. They found the stuff, like it was free for them. You know, I might just go down the corner shop now and find some beers. You know, I found them. You know, I don't have to pay for them. I found them, dude. You know, come on. This is a young man. This is not a resident. You might ask yourself the question, okay, so why does the guy on the right get treated differently to the two people on the left? And then you might look at the skin color of the guy on the right and the two people on the left, and you might think, damn, there is intrinsic racism. And you'd be right to think that. And moreover, you'd be right to start asking questions after the work we've done over the last couple of weeks in these lectures about, you know, why is that there? What is the ideology that's being transmitted here in that second message? You know, the looter. What is the ideological message that being conveyed here? Look, I don't have to tell you what it is. You can work it out for yourself. Black people in America are considered criminals. Okay? And this ideology is committed through this kind of discourse, this kind of media discourse, which pins out this guy as a looter, while those guys are residents who find stuff. And it legitimizes that discourse over time of African Americans being criminals. And this is what Black Lives Matter is against, right? You know, this is why I think Black Lives Matter is an extremely important movement, because it's against this. And it's kind of crazy, right? And it's kind of disgusting and we hate it. But that kind of ideology, which comes from people in power, they use a particular ideology legitimized through the continual discourses in the media to create a common sense idea of what people are like. And there's just this one example from Hurricane Katrina. And the reason why I choose it is it's so blatant. It's so obvious. They're doing the same thing as each other. That the language used, words have power, words have meaning, because they construct a discourse, does this. I mean, it's crazy stuff. It's crazy stuff, but it's important that we know this, okay? And indeed, all the way through this, if we look through the Marxist critique of the media and ownership, and we look at Adorno's critique, therefore, and, you know, Adorno agreeing with Marx that these ideas, you know, the media is used to produce ideological texts which are all the same as one another, which promote particular ideologies, which then become, in Gramsci's terms, hegemonic or common sense. And we see examples like this. We see how problematic media discourse can be. So power, ideology, and discourse, how do they fit together? Power is a function of the ownership of the means of production, so it goes all the way back to the Marxist stuff. Ideologies, the ideas of a particular class. Again, we saw that in the Marxist model, you know, the ideas which come from ownership of the means of production get legitimized in the culture of the superstructure, and they keep on legitimizing the ownership in a particular way. And discourse is how those ideas are spread and legitimized through ideological media texts, which Adorno and Horkheimer were talking about. You know, all mass culture is identical because it's all doing this discursive work. So what Stuart Hall Paul and Foucault talk about, and this is crazy. In 20 minutes, I have taught you so much important stuff. I need some kind of award, people. Okay, next video. See you there.